There is a moment in almost every twin flame journey that feels unsettling. A moment when the roles seem to reverse. When the one who once disappeared, avoided, delayed, or ran, suddenly turns around and chases. If you are watching this, chances are you are sensing it already. Not through dramatic declarations, not always through obvious actions, but through subtle energetic shifts. The silence feels different now. The distance feels charged. And deep inside something whispers, this is not the same anymore. For so long, the divine masculine was the runner. Detached. Focused elsewhere. Busy building, achieving, distracting, surviving. While the divine feminine waited. Felt. Loved. Searched for meaning in every sign, every pause, every unanswered message. And now something has flipped. The divine masculine is suddenly restless. Uneasy. Pulled back toward what he once tried to escape. Why? And more importantly, why is this happening now? This shift is not random. It is not coincidence. And it is definitely not about desperation or ego-driven pursuit. What you are witnessing is something much deeper. An energetic correction. For a long time, the divine masculine existed almost entirely in the external world. Identity was built through action, productivity, status, and control. Feelings were managed, minimized, or postponed. Vulnerability was seen as weakness. Love, especially unconditional love, felt dangerous. So when the twin flame connection activated something too intense to control, the instinct was simple. Run. Run into work. Run into responsibility. Run into other relationships. Run into logic, reason, or numbness. Anything to avoid the mirror. Because the divine feminine was not just a person. She was a reflection of unhealed wounds, unprocessed grief, unclaimed emotions, a self that had been buried under expectations and survival patterns. And the divine masculine was not ready to face that. At least not then. But energy never stays frozen. What most people do not understand is this. The twin flame dynamic is not controlled by personalities. It is governed by consciousness. And consciousness evolves. While the divine masculine appeared absent, something was happening beneath the surface. Not in a straight line. Not gracefully. But inevitably. At the same time, something else was shifting. The divine feminine stopped chasing. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But gradually. She began turning inward. Redirecting love back to herself. Building an identity that no longer depended on being chosen. And this is where everything changes. Because when the divine feminine withdraws her energy, not out of bitterness but out of self-respect, the entire energetic field recalibrates. The mirror goes dark. And suddenly, the divine masculine feels something unfamiliar. Loss. Not the loss of a relationship, but the loss of resonance. The loss of being seen at a soul level. The loss of a connection that once quietly anchored him, even when he pretended not to notice. This is when the chase begins. But not in the way most people imagine. This is not about obsession. It is not about control. It is not about winning the divine feminine back. It is about awakening. The divine masculine begins to feel the emptiness of achievements that once felt meaningful. The success that once numbed the pain no longer works. The distractions feel hollow. And for the first time, he asks questions he avoided for years. Why do I feel incomplete? Why does nothing replace what I walked away from? Why does my soul feel restless even when my life looks stable? These questions do not come gently. They come through discomfort, through insomnia, through emotional surges that feel irrational, through an unexplained pull toward the divine feminine's energy. And here is the part that few talk about. The divine masculine does not consciously decide to chase. He is pulled by unresolved truth. Pulled by the collapse of old identity structures. Pulled by the realization that running did not bring peace, only delay. This is why the shift feels sudden. From the outside, it looks like a switch flipped overnight. But in reality, it has been building quietly for a long time. The ego can resist love for years. But the soul does not forget. And when the timing is right, when the divine feminine has reclaimed herself, when the energetic imbalance can no longer be sustained, when the collective frequency supports deeper awareness, the divine masculine turns around. Not because he wants to chase, but because standing still hurts more than moving forward. So if you are feeling this shift, if you sense the divine masculine's energy leaning back toward you, if the dynamic feels reversed in subtle but undeniable ways, know this: you did not cause it by waiting. You did not earn it by suffering. And you do not need to manage it. This is a soul-level correction. And it is only the beginning. In the next part, we will go deeper into who the divine masculine truly is beyond the stereotypes, and why this awakening could never happen until now. But for now, sit with this question. What happens when the one who ran finally realizes that there is nowhere left to run to? To understand why the divine masculine is now becoming the chaser, we first need to dismantle one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding him. The divine masculine is not cold. He is not heartless. He is not incapable of love. What he is conditioned. Conditioned to survive in a world that rewards control over vulnerability. Conditioned to measure worth through results, not emotions. Conditioned to believe that stability means suppression. From a very early stage, the divine masculine learns a silent rule. Feel less. Do more. Success is praised. Strength is admired. Independence is mandatory. But emotional openness? That is something to be postponed or hidden. This is why, when people describe the divine masculine as distant or unavailable, they are only seeing the outer armor. Beneath that armor lives someone profoundly sensitive. Someone who feels deeply, but does not know how to hold what he feels. And this is where the twin flame connection becomes unbearable for him. Because the divine feminine does not ask him to perform. She does not validate him for what he achieves. She sees him, not the role, not the title, not the mask, the soul. And for someone who has spent a lifetime defining himself by external identity, being seen at a soul level feels terrifying. The divine masculine is built for action, structure, and direction. But the twin flame connection pulls him into the inner world, a place he was never taught to navigate. So when the divine feminine enters his life, something paradoxical happens. He feels more alive than ever before, and more exposed than he has ever been. Love no longer feels like comfort, feels like a mirror that reflects back not only potential but pain, unhealed abandonment wounds, shame around emotional needs, fear of not being enough without achievement. And instead of processing these emotions, the divine masculine does what he knows best. He retreats into logic. He tells himself he is not ready. He convinces himself that timing is wrong. He rationalizes distance as responsibility, maturity, or realism. But what he is really doing is protecting his identity, because to fully step into the twin flame connection would require surrender. And surrender is the one thing the divine masculine has been taught to avoid. This is why, in the early stages of the journey, the divine masculine often appears detached or avoidant. Not because he does not care, but because caring feels like losing control. And control is his anchor. Yet control comes at a cost. As long as the divine masculine remains identified with the external world alone, his inner life remains fragmented. He may appear stable, but internally something is missing. The divine feminine feels this absence instinctively. She senses that he is divided, one foot in the physical world, one foot resisting the emotional. And this division creates tension, because the twin flame connection demands wholeness. It does not tolerate half-presence. This is why the divine masculine runs, not away from the divine feminine, but away from himself. However, what looks like avoidance is often a slow internal battle. The divine masculine does not escape unscathed. Even while physically distant, the connection continues to work on him. Through dreams, through emotional triggers, through repeated patterns that mirror the same lesson. No matter how far he goes, he cannot recreate the resonance he felt with the divine feminine. Other relationships feel lighter, but also shallower. Achievements feel impressive, but also empty. And slowly something cracks. This crack is not sudden awakening. It is erosion. The erosion of false identity. The erosion of outdated beliefs about strength. The erosion of the illusion that control equals safety. The divine masculine begins to notice that his old strategies no longer bring peace. What once worked stops working. Distractions lose their power. Success feels transactional. Silence becomes loud. And in that silence, the divine feminine's energy resurfaces, not as longing but as truth. This is the moment many mistake for regret. But it is not regret. It is recognition. Recognition that something sacred was touched and avoided. Recognition that the connection was not accidental. Recognition that running did not resolve anything. And this is when the divine masculine starts to change. Not because the divine feminine demanded it. Not because she waited long enough. Not because he was persuaded. But because his soul has reached a threshold. A point where suppression hurts more than vulnerability. This is the divine masculine awakening. Not into romance but into consciousness. He begins to question the narrative he lived by. Is strength really about emotional distance? Is love supposed to feel safe but empty? Is success meaningful if it disconnects him from his own heart? These questions destabilize him. And destabilization is necessary. Because the divine masculine cannot awaken while remaining comfortable. His evolution is forged through internal collapse. And this is why the shift you are witnessing now feels intense. Because it is not about desire. It is about identity death. The old divine masculine, defined by control, performance, and avoidance, cannot coexist with the truth of the twin flame connection. One must fall. And as the old structure dissolves, something new begins to emerge. A divine masculine who is no longer afraid of feeling. Who no longer equates vulnerability with weakness. Who begins to understand that love does not diminish him. It integrates him. This is the version of the divine masculine that turns toward the divine feminine. Not to chase her approval, but to reclaim a part of himself that was left behind. In the next part, we will explore why the divine masculine ran in the first place, diving even deeper into fear, karmic patterns, and unconscious survival responses. But for now, hold this truth. The divine masculine was never incapable of love. He was simply taught to fear the very thing that could make him whole. If the divine masculine was never incapable of love, then the real question becomes this: why did he run? Not once, not accidentally, but repeatedly. Why did he retreat just when the connection deepened? Why did he hesitate when everything felt real? Why did he choose distance over devotion? The answer is not simple. Because the running was never about the divine feminine. It was about survival. Long before the twin flame connection ever appeared, the divine masculine learned how to protect himself. Not consciously, not intentionally, but through experience. Many divine masculines grew up in environments where emotional expression was either unsafe, ignored, or punished. They learned early that vulnerability did not bring comfort. It brought disappointment. Needs were minimized. Feelings were misunderstood. Dependence was equated with weakness. So the divine masculine adapted. He became self-reliant. He learned to endure rather than feel. He built armor instead of intimacy. And over time, this armor became his identity. From the outside, he appeared strong, capable, grounded. But inside, he carried a quiet belief. If I open my heart fully, I will lose myself. This belief does not disappear just because love arrives. In fact, real love makes it louder. The twin flame connection is not gentle for the divine masculine. It does not unfold slowly. It does not allow emotional distance. It bypasses logic and touches places he has spent a lifetime avoiding. Suddenly, emotions surface without permission. Memories resurface without warning. Long-buried fears rise to the surface. And this creates panic. Because the divine masculine's nervous system is not accustomed to emotional intensity. What feels like love to the divine feminine often feels like danger to him. Not because love is harmful, but because it dismantles his survival strategies. So when the connection deepens, the divine masculine does what his system has been trained to do. He runs. Running is not cowardice. It is a learned response. A response that once kept him safe. At a karmic level, many divine masculines carry unresolved patterns related to abandonment, rejection, or emotional neglect. Some were taught that love is conditional. Others learned that closeness leads to loss. Some internalized the belief that they must earn affection through achievement. These imprints do not disappear in adulthood. They operate beneath awareness. So when the divine feminine offers unconditional presence, when she sees him beyond performance, it creates internal conflict. Part of him longs for it. Another part does not trust it. This inner division becomes unbearable. And instead of resolving the conflict internally, the divine masculine externalizes it. He distances himself. He rationalizes his withdrawal. He convinces himself that leaving is the mature choice. But what he is really doing is postponing pain, because staying would require facing wounds he has never had the tools to heal. There is also a deeper karmic layer. The twin flame connection is not just about romance. It is about soul memory. And often, the divine masculine carries past life or ancestral patterns of responsibility, sacrifice, or emotional suppression. In many lifetimes or family lineages, he learned to prioritize duty over desire, survival over softness, structure over surrender. So when the twin flame appears, it disrupts not only his current identity, but his karmic blueprint. This is why the fear feels disproportionate, why the urge to escape feels urgent, why logic cannot explain the intensity. The divine masculine is not reacting to the present moment alone. He is reacting to accumulated memory, memory stored in the body, memory stored in the nervous system, memory stored in the soul. And this is why reasoning with him rarely works. You cannot talk someone out of a fear they did not consciously choose. Another reason the divine masculine runs is shame. A subtle, hidden shame that says, I am not ready. I will fail. I cannot give what is required. The twin flame connection activates the highest version of the self. And for someone who doubts their emotional capacity, this feels like exposure. What if I disappoint her? What if I cannot sustain this level of intimacy? What if I lose control? Rather than risk inadequacy, the divine masculine chooses absence. Because absence feels safer than being seen and falling short. Ironically, this avoidance creates the very pain he fears. But fear does not operate logically. It operates protectively. And here is the most misunderstood part. The divine masculine does not feel relief after running. He feels temporary numbness, which is not the same thing. He distracts himself, immerses in work, seeks stability elsewhere. But the connection does not dissolve. It waits. And while he appears distant, the bond continues to work on him internally. Through discomfort, through dissatisfaction, through recurring thoughts he cannot explain. He may try to replicate the connection, but nothing holds the same depth. Because the twin flame connection is not interchangeable. It is specific. So over time, the cost of running becomes evident. Avoidance no longer brings peace. Distance no longer brings clarity. Control no longer brings safety. And slowly, the divine masculine realizes something painful. Running did not protect him. It delayed him. This realization does not arrive gently. It often arrives through collapse, a breakdown of identity, a loss of motivation, an emotional reckoning he can no longer suppress. And this is where the running stops. Not because fear disappears, but because fear is no longer the most painful option. This is the threshold moment. The moment when staying present, even in discomfort, feels more survivable than escaping. This is when the divine masculine turns inward, when he begins to question his patterns, when he starts to recognize that avoidance was never neutrality, it was self-abandonment. And this recognition is the beginning of transformation. In the next part, we will explore the energetic turning point, what changed recently, and why the dynamic is reversing now at a collective level. But for now, understand this. The divine masculine did not run because he did not care. He ran because caring required a level of self-awareness he had not yet developed. And growth cannot be rushed, can only be realized. Every twin flame journey reaches a moment that feels irreversible. A moment when the old dynamic no longer functions. When silence no longer protects. When distance no longer stabilizes. This is the energetic turning point. And what makes this moment so confusing is that it rarely announces itself through dramatic events. It arrives quietly, through a shift in frequency, through a change in inner posture, through a subtle but undeniable reorientation of energy. To understand why the divine masculine is becoming the chaser now, we must look beyond individual behavior and into the energetic field itself. Because this shift is not happening in isolation. It is happening collectively. For a long time, the divine feminine carried the emotional weight of the connection. She felt the bond intensely. She searched for meaning. She tried to hold the connection together, sometimes at the cost of herself. This was not weakness. It was a phase. A necessary phase. The divine feminine archetype is designed to feel first, awaken first, and anchor higher consciousness. But what happens when she evolves beyond longing? What happens when she stops waiting for recognition? That is where the energetic balance begins to correct itself. The turning point occurs the moment the divine feminine chooses inner union over external validation. Not as an act of rejection, not as a strategy, but as an organic return to self. She stops asking, "Why isn't he choosing me?" and begins asking, "Why did I abandon myself?" This is not a small shift. This is seismic. Because the twin flame connection operates like a closed circuit. When one side withdraws unconscious pursuit, the energy must redistribute. And the divine masculine feels it immediately. Even if he cannot name it. Even if there is no physical contact. The energetic tether tightens, not through need but through absence. For the first time, the divine masculine experiences the connection without the buffer of the divine feminine's emotional availability. There is no longer a soft place to unconsciously lean into. No longer a steady energetic presence cushioning his avoidance. And this absence is not punishment. It is information. Tells him something has changed. This is often when the divine masculine starts feeling unsettled without knowing why. Life looks the same but feels different. He may still be successful. Still busy. Still externally stable. But internally something feels off. This discomfort is the first sign of awakening. Because comfort was never meant to last forever. Comfort was the incubator, not the destination. At a collective level, we are also witnessing the collapse of outdated masculine structures. For generations, masculinity was defined by dominance, suppression, and endurance. Emotions were liabilities. Intuition was dismissed. Connection was secondary to control. But that model is no longer sustainable. We are living in a time where emotional intelligence, authenticity, and integration are becoming essential, not optional. And the divine masculine is being called to evolve, not because the divine feminine demands it, but because the old blueprint no longer works. This is why the timing feels sudden. It is not that the divine masculine decided to change. It is that the environment no longer supports avoidance. The energetic field itself is shifting toward coherence. Toward wholeness, toward truth. And in this field, fragmentation becomes painful. The divine masculine can no longer compartmentalize his inner and outer worlds. The split between who he is and who he pretends to be becomes impossible to maintain. So the soul intervenes. This intervention often feels like restlessness, anxiety without a clear cause, a sense of loss without a specific event, a longing that cannot be satisfied by anything external. This longing is not for the divine feminine as a person. It is for alignment, for integrity, for the part of himself that woke up in her presence and fell asleep when he ran. This is why the chase now feels different. It is not impulsive. It is not dramatic. It is not ego-driven. It is quiet, internal, persistent. The divine masculine begins to revisit memories, not nostalgically but reflectively. He sees patterns he once avoided. He recognizes moments where fear made decisions for him. He begins to understand that the connection was not a threat, it was a mirror. And this realization destabilizes him, because it removes the illusion that running was neutral. It reveals that avoidance had consequences. Not moral consequences but energetic ones. Every time the divine masculine suppressed truth, he fragmented himself. And fragmentation is exhausting. So now the energy demands reintegration. This is why so many divine masculines are awakening simultaneously. Not because of coincidence, but because the collective field is ripe for transformation. We are at a point in time where unconscious patterns are being exposed rapidly. What once took decades now takes months. What once took lifetimes now takes years. The acceleration is intense. And the twin flame connection by its nature amplifies this acceleration. So when the divine feminine steps into embodiment, the divine masculine is forced to respond. Not externally at first. Internally. He begins to feel the absence of resonance. And this absence becomes unbearable. Not because he is lonely, but because he is disconnected from himself. This is the true energetic turning point. The moment when the divine masculine realizes that chasing the external world no longer fills the void, and that the only thing that ever reflected his true self was the connection he tried to escape. This is why the roles reverse. Not because the divine feminine pulls, but because she stops holding space for misalignment. She becomes whole. And wholeness does not chase fragmentation. Fragmentation moves toward wholeness. Always. So if you are witnessing this shift now, if the divine masculine's energy feels closer, heavier, more present, if the dynamic feels charged in a new way, understand this. You are not regressing. You are crossing a threshold. And this threshold is not about reunion. It is about readiness. In the next part, we will explore what happens when the divine feminine stops chasing completely, and why this is the most powerful and misunderstood phase of the journey. But for now, let this land. Nothing changed because you waited. Everything changed because you chose yourself. And when you did, the universe had no choice but to respond. There is a moment in the twin flame journey that is often misunderstood. A moment that looks on the surface like surrender, like giving up, like emotional withdrawal. But in truth, it is none of those things. It is the moment the divine feminine stops chasing. And when that happens, everything changes. For a long time, the divine feminine was the emotional anchor of the connection. She felt first. She awakened first. She sensed the depth of the bond long before it made sense in the physical world. This early awareness often placed her in a vulnerable position, because when one soul recognizes truth before the other, imbalance is inevitable. The divine feminine did not chase because she was weak. She chased because she remembered. She remembered the connection at a soul level. She remembered love beyond logic. She remembered something ancient and sacred that the divine masculine had not yet accessed. So she waited. She hoped. She reached. Not always outwardly, but energetically. She held space. She sent love. She believed that if she stayed open long enough, the divine masculine would feel safe enough to return. And for a while this was necessary, because her openness activated the connection. But what begins as devotion can slowly turn into self-abandonment if it is not balanced. And this is where the shift begins. The divine feminine reaches a threshold, not of exhaustion but of clarity. She realizes something subtle yet profound. I am giving love without receiving presence. Not because the divine masculine is cruel, but because he is unavailable. And availability cannot be forced. So the divine feminine begins to turn inward. At first, this inward turn feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because she has identified for so long as the one who holds, waits, feels, and hopes. Letting go of the chase feels like letting go of purpose. But what she soon discovers is this. The chase was never her purpose. Wholeness was. The moment the divine feminine chooses herself, not as a defense, not as retaliation, but as truth, the entire energetic structure shifts. She stops asking questions that keep her tethered to uncertainty. She stops monitoring signs. She stops reading between lines. She stops shaping her life around the possibility of reunion. Instead, she asks a different question. What does my soul need now? This is not detachment in the cold sense. This is embodiment. She grounds into her body, into her creativity, into her intuition, into her own becoming. She stops waiting to be chosen and chooses herself. And this choice is not silent. Energetically, it is thunderous. Because the divine feminine has always been the emotional and energetic stabilizer of the connection. When she withdraws unconscious pursuit, the field destabilizes. The divine masculine feels it immediately. Not as loss of love, but as loss of access. The soft energetic presence he unconsciously leaned into is no longer available. There is no longer a gentle emotional current carrying the connection forward for him, and for the first time he has to generate movement from within. This is where the chase begins. But it does not look like desperation. It looks like discomfort, restlessness, unsettled emotions, an internal pull that cannot be explained. The divine masculine may not consciously think, "I need her." Instead he feels, something is missing. And this absence forces him inward, because the external world no longer soothes the discomfort. Achievements feel flat. Distractions feel empty. Routine feels mechanical. The divine feminine's withdrawal does not punish him. It reveals him to himself. And this is why her stopping the chase is not abandonment. It is activation. It activates accountability. It activates self-reflection. It activates longing not for a person but for alignment. This is the paradox of the twin flame dynamic. The more the divine feminine chases, the less the divine masculine moves. The more the divine feminine stands still in her truth, the more the divine masculine is compelled to move. Because energy seeks balance. And for so long, the balance was maintained by her effort. Now the system must correct itself. This is also the phase where many divine feminines feel guilt. Guilt for letting go. Guilt for choosing peace. Guilt for not holding space the way they used to. But this guilt is a residue of conditioning, not intuition. The divine feminine was never meant to carry the connection alone. She was meant to embody wholeness. And wholeness does not chase fragmentation. Wholeness attracts integration. As she anchors into self-worth, something else happens. She becomes energetically unavailable to unconscious dynamics. She no longer resonates with breadcrumbs. She no longer tolerates emotional inconsistency. She no longer confuses longing with love. And this clarity creates pressure. Pressure on the divine masculine to either evolve or fall away. This is why some divine masculines return during this phase, and why others disappear entirely. Both outcomes serve growth. Because the divine feminine is no longer attached to outcome. She is attached to truth. This is the moment the journey shifts from attachment-based love to embodied love. From longing to alignment. From waiting to being. And here is the part that changes everything. When the divine feminine stops chasing, she does not close her heart. She opens it inward. She becomes rooted rather than reaching. And this rootedness is magnetic. Not because she wants attention, but because she is no longer leaking energy. The divine masculine senses this stability. And stability is what his nervous system has been seeking all along. But he could not access it while she was overgiving. Because overgiving reinforced imbalance. Now he must meet her at her level or not at all. This is why the chase feels inevitable. Because the divine masculine is not chasing the divine feminine. He is chasing the version of himself he touched in her presence. The groundedness. The truth. The emotional depth. And this is why reunion, if it happens, must come after this phase. Because anything before this was premature. The divine feminine stopping the chase is not the end of love. It is the beginning of integrity. In the next part, we will explore the signs that the divine masculine has truly become the chaser, and how to discern genuine awakening from temporary fear-based pursuit. But for now, remember this. You did not lose anything by choosing yourself. You reclaimed everything. And once you did, the energy had no choice but to respond. When the divine masculine begins to shift into the role of the chaser, it rarely looks the way most people expect. It is not always dramatic. It is not always immediate. And it is almost never linear. In fact, one of the most confusing aspects of this phase is that the divine masculine may not consciously identify himself as chasing at all. From the outside, it can look subtle. From the inside, it feels overwhelming. This is why discernment is essential. Because not every return is awakening. And not every pursuit is alignment. So how do you know when the divine masculine has truly become the chaser? The first sign is internal movement before external action. A fear-based return seeks reassurance immediately. An awakened shift begins internally. Before the divine masculine reaches out, something changes inside him. His thoughts linger. Memories surface with emotional clarity rather than confusion. He begins to replay moments, not to romanticize but to understand. This reflection is new. Previously, he avoided introspection. Now he cannot escape it. He starts asking himself questions he once dismissed. Why did I react that way? What was I really afraid of? Why does this connection still affect me? This inner inquiry is the foundation of the chase. Because true pursuit does not begin with action. It begins with awareness. The second sign is a shift in the quality of contact. When the divine masculine reaches out from fear, the communication feels anxious, inconsistent, vague, testing. But when he reaches out from awakening, the tone changes. There is presence. He listens rather than deflects. He engages rather than distracts. He speaks with more emotional honesty, even if imperfect. The conversations feel heavier, not burdensome but meaningful. He is no longer skimming the surface. He asks questions he avoided before. He remembers details he once overlooked. He shows curiosity about your inner world, not just your availability. This is not about intensity. It is about depth. Another key sign is ownership of past behavior. A fear-based chaser avoids accountability. He explains. He justifies. He reframes the past to protect his self-image. But an awakened divine masculine begins to acknowledge patterns. Not defensively, not dramatically, but sincerely. He may say things like, I didn't know how to handle what I felt. I see now that I ran when things became real. I wasn't ready, but I understand why that hurt you. These words matter, because ownership signals integration. He is no longer separating who he was from who he is becoming. He is bridging the gap. Another unmistakable sign is consistency without pressure. Fear-based pursuit rushes. It wants answers. It wants reassurance. It wants resolution now. Awakened pursuit is steady. It does not force timelines. It does not demand outcomes. It does not pressure the divine feminine to respond a certain way. Instead, it shows up. Repeatedly. Calmly. Reliably. The divine masculine begins to regulate his nervous system. He no longer oscillates between closeness and disappearance. This does not mean he is perfect. But he no longer vanishes when emotions arise. Presence becomes his practice. Another subtle but powerful sign is his relationship to silence changes. Before awakening, silence was his escape. Now, silence becomes uncomfortable, but not avoided. If there is distance, he feels it. Not with panic, but with awareness. He no longer assumes the connection will hold itself together without effort. This is why the divine masculine often initiates contact during this phase. Not to control the narrative, but to remain connected. Because absence no longer feels neutral. Feels like self-betrayal. Another sign is his motivation shifts from fear of loss to desire for alignment. This distinction is crucial. Fear says, I don't want to lose you. Awakening says, I don't want to lose myself again. The divine masculine begins to understand that the divine feminine is not the source of his wholeness, but the mirror that revealed it. So his pursuit is not about possession. It is about integrity. He wants to show up differently, not to be chosen, but because misalignment now feels unbearable. Another real-life indicator is he respects boundaries rather than resisting them. In the past, boundaries felt like rejection. Now they feel like structure. The divine masculine begins to appreciate clarity. He no longer pushes when the divine feminine needs space. He no longer manipulates access. He does not punish distance with withdrawal. Instead, he adapts. This adaptability signals growth. Because the old divine masculine equated boundaries with loss of control. The awakened divine masculine understands that boundaries create safety. There is also a profound energetic sign that many divine feminines feel before they see. The pressure lifts. Not the connection, but the tension. The anxious charge dissolves. There is less waiting, less guessing, less emotional labor. The divine feminine feels calmer, even when nothing is defined. This calm is the body's recognition of balance returning. And finally, the most important sign. The divine masculine is willing to risk vulnerability without guarantee. Fear-based pursuit seeks reassurance first. Awakened pursuit moves without certainty. He opens emotionally without knowing the outcome. He speaks truth without knowing how it will land. He stays present even when the response is slow or unclear. This willingness is everything, because it shows that he is no longer negotiating his heart. He is offering it. But here is the truth many do not want to hear. Not every divine masculine reaches this stage. And not every return is meant to last. Some returns are tests. Some are closures. Some are catalysts for final detachment. And this is where the divine feminine's discernment matters most. Because the goal of this journey was never to be chased. It was to be aligned. The divine feminine does not need to evaluate effort. She needs to feel resonance. Does his presence bring peace or confusion? Does his energy feel grounded or frantic? Does his pursuit feel integrated or reactive? These questions matter more than words. Because awakening is not proven by intensity. It is proven by embodiment. In the next part, we will explore why this chase is not actually about reunion, and how misunderstanding this phase can lead to repeating old cycles. But for now, remember this. The divine masculine does not become the chaser to reclaim the divine feminine. He becomes the chaser because he can no longer run from himself. And that changes everything. One of the most common misunderstandings in the twin flame journey happens right here. At the exact moment the divine masculine begins to chase, many people assume the destination is reunion. Finally, at last, the long-awaited ending. But this assumption is where many journeys collapse back into old patterns. Because the divine masculine becoming the chaser is not the finish line. It is the turning point. And the purpose of this phase is not reunion. It is alignment. To understand this, we need to shift perspective. Reunion is an external event. Alignment is an internal state. And the twin flame journey has always prioritized the internal over the external. When the divine masculine begins to pursue, something essential has changed, but not everything has healed. Awakening does not mean completion. Movement does not mean integration. The divine masculine may now be aware of the connection. He may feel the pull intensely. He may even recognize his past avoidance. But awareness alone does not equal embodiment. This is why reunion too early often fails. Because the internal structures that caused separation in the first place have not fully dissolved. The divine masculine might be chasing clarity, relief, or reconnection, but still carrying unintegrated fear. And fear, even when subtle, destabilizes union. This phase exists to reveal what is still misaligned. For both sides. For the divine masculine, chasing brings unresolved patterns to the surface. He begins to notice where he still wants control, where he still seeks reassurance, where he still fears loss more than he values truth. These patterns do not disappear because he feels love. They surface because he feels love. And this is precisely the point. Alignment requires confrontation, not with the other person but with the self. For the divine feminine, this phase tests embodiment. She has already stopped chasing. She has reclaimed herself. But now she is faced with a new challenge. Can she stay rooted while being desired? This is not easy, because desire can be seductive. The return of attention can awaken old hopes, old fantasies, old identities tied to being chosen. This is why the universe does not rush reunion. Because both must now prove, not through effort but through stability, that they can hold connection without losing themselves. Inner alignment means something very specific. Your thoughts, emotions, boundaries, and actions are no longer in conflict. You no longer say yes while feeling no. You no longer wait while pretending you are detached. You no longer shrink to keep connection alive. For the divine feminine, alignment means remaining sovereign. Even when the divine masculine steps forward, she does not abandon her rhythm to match his pace. She does not lower standards to preserve momentum. She does not confuse pursuit with readiness. And this is critical, because the divine masculine's chase is not a reward for patience. It is a test of integration. If the divine feminine rushes reunion to relieve longing, the imbalance returns. If the divine masculine rushes reunion to escape discomfort, the foundation cracks. So the universe creates space. Space where desire is present, but outcome is withheld. This space is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because it forces both to ask deeper questions. For the divine masculine, can I stay present without guarantee? Can I face rejection without collapsing? Can I choose truth even if it costs comfort? For the divine feminine, can I receive without overgiving? Can I allow closeness without self-abandonment? Can I trust my grounding more than my longing? These questions define alignment, not reunion. Another important truth: reunion is not the goal of the twin flame journey. Wholeness is. Reunion is a byproduct of wholeness when it happens. And sometimes wholeness completes the journey without physical union. This is difficult for many to accept. But it does not diminish the connection. It fulfills it. Because the twin flame bond was never meant to guarantee a relationship. It was meant to catalyze consciousness. And consciousness does not negotiate. It evolves. This is why many divine masculines chase, and then pause. Why progress feels slow. Why steps forward are followed by reflection rather than commitment. This is not regression. It is integration. The nervous system is recalibrating. The ego is dissolving. The old identity is still shedding. And shedding is not linear. For the divine feminine, the invitation during this phase is subtle but profound. Do not interpret movement as permission to collapse inward. Stay upright. Stay embodied. Stay true. Because your grounded presence is now the stabilizing force. Not your effort. Not your explanations. Not your patience. Your being. And here is the paradox that governs this phase. The less you focus on reunion, the more alignment becomes possible. The more alignment becomes possible, the more reunion, if aligned, can emerge naturally. This is why pressure destroys this phase. Pressure to define. Pressure to decide. Pressure to resolve. Pressure reactivates fear. And fear resurrects old roles. The divine masculine becomes avoidant again. The divine feminine becomes anxious again. The cycle repeats. So this phase exists to break the cycle. To allow desire without attachment. Presence without possession. Connection without control. When inner alignment is achieved, reunion no longer feels urgent. It feels inevitable or irrelevant. Both are signs of wholeness. And this is how you know the journey has matured. Not when you get what you want, but when you no longer need it to feel complete. In the next part, we will explore what the divine feminine is truly meant to do now, and how to remain in alignment without suppressing love or hope. But for now, let this truth settle. The divine masculine did not become the chaser so you could reunite. He became the chaser because misalignment was no longer survivable. And alignment always comes before union. When the divine masculine begins to chase, the divine feminine enters one of the most delicate phases of the entire journey. This is not the phase of action. It is not the phase of explanation. It is not the phase of reassurance. It is the phase of embodiment. And embodiment is not passive. It is precise. For a long time, the divine feminine's role was to awaken, to feel, to remember, to hold space for truth before it could be spoken. Now her role changes. She is no longer here to activate the connection. She is here to stabilize alignment. This shift can feel confusing, because when attention returns, when the divine masculine's energy leans forward, old instincts may resurface. The instinct to respond quickly. The instinct to soften boundaries. The instinct to meet him halfway, before he has fully arrived. But this is not what alignment asks of her. Alignment asks for consistency of self. The divine feminine is meant to remain exactly where she is. Grounded. Rooted. Whole. Not frozen but steady. Not guarded but sovereign. Her task now is not to interpret his movement. It is to maintain her frequency. Because the moment she adjusts herself to accommodate his pace, the energetic balance destabilizes again. This is why the divine feminine must resist the urge to explain her growth. She does not need to justify boundaries. She does not need to translate her healing. She does not need to educate him on what she learned while he was gone. Alignment speaks without words. And words at this stage often dilute truth. What the divine feminine is meant to do now is to trust her nervous system. Her body already knows whether something is aligned. Calm is alignment. Urgency is not. Peace is alignment. Confusion is not. If his presence activates anxiety, even subtly, that information matters. Not to judge him. Not to reject him. but to guide her response. Because embodiment means listening to internal signals rather than external narratives. Another essential role of the divine feminine during this phase is non-reactivity. Non-reactivity does not mean indifference. It means choice. She no longer reacts to silence with fear. She no longer reacts to attention with collapse. She no longer reacts to uncertainty with overthinking. Instead, she responds from grounded awareness. If he steps forward, she receives without rushing. If he pauses, she remains stable without chasing. If he retreats, she does not follow. This neutrality is powerful because it removes emotional leverage. The divine masculine can no longer rely on her reactions to regulate his internal state. He must regulate himself. And this self-regulation is a prerequisite for true union. The divine feminine is also meant to hold boundaries without aggression. Boundaries are not punishments. They are containers. They define what is safe. During this phase, boundaries may look like not engaging in ambiguous communication, not accepting inconsistent presence, not reopening emotional wounds without accountability, but they also look like openness, receiving honesty, allowing vulnerability, listening without fixing. Boundaries are not walls. They are structures. And structures allow intimacy to deepen safely. One of the most difficult tasks for the divine feminine now is to release the need to interpret meaning. Not every message is a sign. Not every pause is symbolic. Not every movement is a message from the universe. Meaning-making was necessary during awakening. But during alignment, it becomes a distraction. The divine feminine no longer needs to decode the connection. She needs to live her life fully within it or without it. This is where many divine feminines experience a quiet grief. Not grief for the connection, but grief for the version of themselves who waited, who hoped, who endured, who imagined reunion as salvation. Letting go of that identity can feel like loss, but it is liberation. Because the divine feminine is no longer defined by the connection. She is defined by presence. Another important role during this phase is discernment without judgment. The divine feminine may observe inconsistencies in the divine masculine's behavior. Moments of courage followed by hesitation. Moments of honesty followed by silence. This does not mean he has failed. It means he is integrating. But discernment means she does not ignore patterns. She observes them without emotional charge. She allows time to reveal truth. Because alignment is not proven through declarations. It is proven through sustained presence. The divine feminine is also meant to continue expanding her own life. This is critical. Alignment does not mean waiting in stillness. It means moving forward without attachment to outcome. She invests in her body, her creativity, her purpose, her relationships. Not to distract herself from the connection, but to embody wholeness regardless of it. This expansion creates spaciousness. And spaciousness is what allows the divine masculine to step forward without pressure. Pressure collapses growth. Space invites it. One of the deepest truths of this phase is this. The divine feminine is no longer responsible for the connection's direction. She is responsible only for her integrity. This means she does not manage the pace. She does not steer outcomes. She does not hold the emotional center for both. She stays in her lane. And paradoxically, this allows the connection to mature. If reunion is aligned, it will arise organically. If separation is required for completion, it will feel peaceful, not devastating. This is how you know the divine feminine is aligned. She no longer fears either outcome. She remains open but unattached, present but sovereign, loving but not self-sacrificing. This phase is not about proving strength. It is about living truth. And truth does not rush. In the next part, we will explore how this journey culminates in a higher message, and how to close the cycle with clarity, inspiration, and conscious choice. But for now, let this anchor you. You are not here to convince anyone of your worth. You are here to embody it. And from that place, everything that is meant to meet you will know how. When we zoom out far enough, something becomes clear. This journey was never just about two people. The moment the divine masculine becomes the chaser is not merely a personal turning point. It is a symbolic one. It reflects a collective shift in consciousness. For centuries, Humanity has operated under an imbalanced dynamic: action over presence, logic over intuition, control over connection. Masculine energy at both personal and societal levels was rewarded for dominance, productivity, and emotional suppression. Feminine energy, feeling, receptivity, intuition, was marginalized, romanticized, or dismissed. The twin flame journey exposes this imbalance at an intimate scale. It compresses generations of conditioning into one relationship. And when the divine masculine begins to chase, it signals something profound. The old paradigm is collapsing. This chase is not about reclaiming a lover. It is about reclaiming a lost dimension of self. At a deeper level, the divine masculine's pursuit represents the return of the heart to the center of consciousness. For a long time, the heart was treated as secondary, something to manage after survival, after success, after structure was secured. Now the heart is demanding integration, not because it is weak, but because it holds coherence. The divine masculine chases not because he lacks power, but because power without alignment feels empty. This realization is spreading, not just among twin flames, but across relationships, careers, identities, and belief systems. People are questioning: why does achievement feel hollow? Why does security feel unstable? Why does having it all still feel like something is missing? These questions are symptoms of a collective awakening. The twin flame dynamic simply accelerates them. When the divine masculine turns toward the divine feminine, he is turning toward inner receptivity, toward listening rather than conquering, toward feeling rather than managing, toward truth rather than image. This is not a rejection of masculine strength. It is its evolution. True masculine energy is not rigid. It is grounded. It does not dominate, it contains. It does not avoid emotion, it anchors it. The chase then becomes symbolic. It marks the moment when consciousness stops running from itself, when awareness chooses integration over fragmentation. This is why this phase feels intense, because it dismantles identities built on separation. The divine masculine begins to realize that he cannot outsource meaning to the external world anymore. He cannot chase success to avoid emptiness. He cannot chase validation to avoid vulnerability. He cannot chase control to avoid uncertainty. So the chase redirects inward and outward toward the mirror that first revealed this truth: the divine feminine. But here is the subtlety many miss. The divine feminine is not the destination. She is the threshold. She represents the space where polarity dissolves into wholeness, where doing meets being, where action meets intuition, where structure meets flow. The divine masculine's chase is a movement toward balance, not possession. And balance is not achieved through effort. It is achieved through surrender. This is the great paradox. The divine masculine spent lifetimes learning how to push forward. Now he must learn how to soften inward. This softening does not weaken him, completes him. And this completion has ripple effects. Relationships shift. Priorities realign. Values evolve. What once mattered no longer satisfies. What once scared him now calls him. This is why the chase feels unavoidable, because the soul is no longer willing to live divided. At a collective level, we are witnessing the rise of relational consciousness. People are no longer content with transactional connections. Surface-level intimacy feels insufficient. There is a hunger for resonance, for authenticity, for emotional truth. And this hunger exposes everything built on avoidance. The divine masculine's pursuit mirrors this hunger. It is the masculine principle recognizing that progress without presence is not progress at all. The twin flame journey dramatizes this recognition. It shows us, through longing, separation, reversal, and return, that consciousness evolves through polarity, but matures through integration. This is why not every twin flame journey ends in physical union. Because the true success of the journey is not the relationship. It is the awakening of integrated being. Some unions occur. Others dissolve peacefully. Both outcomes are aligned when inner union is achieved. The divine masculine chasing does not guarantee a happy ending. It guarantees honesty. And honesty is the foundation of any real transformation. This phase asks all of us, regardless of role, to reflect. Where are we still running from ourselves? Where are we seeking externally what can only be integrated internally? Where are we mistaking motion for meaning? The twin flame journey does not answer these questions for us. It amplifies them. And in doing so, it offers an invitation to stop chasing what distracts us from truth and start pursuing alignment instead. This is the bigger message behind the divine masculine's chase. It is not about romance. It is about reconciliation between mind and heart, self and shadow, action and awareness. It is consciousness learning to inhabit itself fully. And that learning changes everything. In the final part, we will bring this journey to completion, exploring how to hold this understanding with grace, and how to close the video with an inspirational message and conscious call to action. But before we go there, let this settle. The divine masculine did not begin to chase because the divine feminine became more desirable. He began to chase because fragmentation was no longer sustainable. And when consciousness reaches that point, there is no turning back. Only forward. Into truth. Into wholeness. Into being. If you have followed this journey from the beginning, you may have noticed something important. This story never moved in a straight line. It unfolded in waves, in reversals, in pauses and awakenings, just like real transformation does. And now at the end it becomes clear. The divine masculine becoming the chaser was never the climax. It was the revelation. Because the true ending of the twin flame journey is not reunion. It is choice. Conscious choice. For the divine masculine, the chase leads him to a crossroads. Not a romantic one but an existential one. He must decide. Will I continue living from habit and fear? Or will I live from truth, even when truth is uncomfortable? Awakening does not remove fear. It changes the relationship to it. The divine masculine does not chase because he is certain. He chases because avoidance is no longer an option. And this is the moment where courage is born. Not the loud kind, not the performative kind, but the quiet courage to remain present, to stay open, to feel without armor, to act without guarantee. For the divine feminine, this final phase brings a different choice. Not whether to accept him, not whether to wait, but whether to remain aligned no matter what unfolds. She has already learned how to stand alone. Now she must learn how to stand open without collapsing. This is the most subtle mastery of all. Because openness without attachment is the highest form of love. At this stage, the divine feminine no longer asks, "Will we reunite?" She asks, "Does this connection meet me where I am now?" This question changes everything. Because it shifts power from hope to presence. And presence is where truth lives. If reunion happens from this place, it is not desperate. It is calm, mutual, grounded. Two whole beings choosing connection. Not to fill a void but to share wholeness. And if reunion does not happen, something equally profound occurs. There is no devastation. There is no collapse. There is gratitude. Because the connection has completed its purpose. This is the part many fear, but few understand. Completion does not mean loss. It means fulfillment. The twin flame journey was never meant to bind you forever. It was meant to awaken you completely. An awakening changes what you desire, what you tolerate, what you chase. This is why, at the end of this journey, something remarkable happens. The chase dissolves. Not because love disappears, but because alignment has been achieved. When alignment is present, no one needs to run. No one needs to chase. Energy meets naturally, or it releases peacefully. Both outcomes are signs of success. This is the message few talk about. Because it does not sell fantasy. It offers truth. And truth asks something of you. It asks you to let go of the story where love saves you. And step into the reality where love reveals you. The divine masculine's chase teaches us this. Running was never the problem. Chasing was never the solution. Disconnection was. And connection begins within. This journey mirrors something much larger than twin flames. It mirrors humanity's shift away from unconscious survival and toward conscious living, away from relationships built on need and toward relationships built on presence, away from roles and toward authenticity. That is why this message resonates so deeply right now, because the world is changing, and so are we. If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself, whether as divine feminine, divine masculine, or somewhere in between. Know this: you were never behind. You were never wrong for feeling deeply. You were never weak for longing. You were never foolish for hoping. Every phase served your awakening. Every delay refined your discernment. Every reversal strengthened your alignment. And now you stand at the most powerful place of all. The place where you choose yourself without closing your heart. That is conscious love. And conscious love does not beg. Does not chase. It does not wait in fear. It remains open, grounded, and free. This is the love that transforms relationships. And the love that transforms consciousness. So as we close this chapter, I want to leave you with a few questions, not to answer now, but to live into. Where am I still seeking externally what I have already integrated internally? Where am I confusing intensity with truth? And what would love look like if I trusted myself completely? Sit with those questions. Let them work quietly. Because answers that matter do not arrive loudly. They arrive clearly. And finally, a gentle invitation. If this message resonated with you, if you felt seen, understood, or grounded through this series, I invite you to stay connected. Sparkles like this video if it supported your journey. Sparkles, subscribe to the channel if you want more conscious, grounded explorations of twin flames, awakening, and inner union. Sparkles, and most importantly, leave a comment below. Where are you right now in this journey? Are you learning to stop chasing, or learning to stop running? Your story matters, and sharing it may help someone else recognize their own. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing awareness. And thank you for walking this path, not toward someone else, but toward yourself.